Can a lover go but to the land of his beloved? And what seeker findeth rest away from his heart's desire?
As you know, one of the goals that we have, is to talk about people that have found the faith and that have led very interesting lives. I mean, they tend to be the Martha Roots and the Getzingers and all those people, and our Julia Thompson and company. And we've been talking a lot about Western Baha'is, but we've mentioned family of Baha'u'llah also. And so one of the points I want to make now, before I go into the story, is that we don't really know much how the faith has functioned in Iran all this time. Like we always, when we read history, we go back to the time of the Bab and Baha'u'llah before he was exiled. But once Baha'u'llah went to Baghdad, and we follow the story back in Baghdad, and we go to Adrianople and all that, and Akka. I think we just don't remember. We don't talk much about what this, forget about the sacrifice of thousands and thousands. But then there was a very difficult life of many people that if you're not Persian or Iranian by birth and you've lived there for a long time and have connections, you may not be following what happened in all these cities and all these villages, how these people lived. This is the basis of the faith. Some of us that have Persian ancestry, I mean, I personally have Iranian ancestry and Egyptian and even Lebanese ancestry, but I don't speak Iranian. I may know maybe 15 or 16 words and a half, or maybe 19 words, I don't know. But we're not in touch, and we don't really follow. And the Persians that we know are the ones that have left Iran and have pioneered great sacrifices. We've been running, it's hard to find a place in this world that is not an Iranian Baha'i that has pioneered and lived. We lived in Morocco, in Tunisia, in France. I mean, even in France, in the community where I was a member of the assembly, most of the members of the assembly were Iranians. So those we know their lives a little bit because they lived in the West, but we don't know what it is like really to be a Baha'i in Iran after Baha'u'llah left, 1860s, 70s, 80s. Anyway, which is kind of sad. We're more familiar with the West and Europe and all that. So since I'm going to pick up the story of our friend that we picked up last time, I told you that I'm going to come back to him because I wanted to read a little bit from his diary. Hájí Mírzá Haydar Alí, we're going to start from his early life, how he became a Baha'i, because one of the things we want to know also is how does one become a Baha'i, and then what happens afterwards if you work very hard. And you have to accept two more people here, 1 and 2. I don't know who they are, but I'm accepting them. And Abbasi Valetu, I don't know. I'm just clicking here. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the right place. So welcome all of you. I was saying that, he is one of these rare Baha'is that has met basically Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shawki Effendi as a young kid. We've seen all of them. Now, these memoirs were translated by Mr. Faizi, Hand of the Coast Faizi, but were abridged. So obviously, there's a lot of editing there, but without him, we wouldn't have anything in English anyway. So this gentleman that you know already, I'm sure maybe this is all pretty not new to you. He was born in Isfahan, and where his father was one of the well-known dignitaries of the Muslim community and a prominent member of the Sheikhi sect. So anyway, he tried to educate his kid, to become like him. Anyway, that's what the intention was. So these are his if you will, his adventures. Now, there are many interesting incidents. I haven't had time because I've just arrived and I haven't had a chance to really do editing. Violeta, can you turn the lights on for me here, please? So I'm going to read from his diary, and we might pause if you care, if you want to, if you raise your hand, I might stop if you have a contribution to make. So the friends have often asked me how I first came in contact with the faith and finally embraced it. As you know, and I always keep mentioning this, the point is that there is the contact that we make, and then there is belief or unbelief. You say, oh, I made contact, but I never became a Baha'i. This is the case of somebody clicking add to unmute. I don't know what this is. I don't know. So the explanation is this: during my life in Iran, I often saw people mercilessly persecuted, often tortured, and beaten to death. Sometimes I saw people hanged by their ears or their hands and pelted with stones. That's what he says. Curious as to why such terrible punishments were being inflicted on these individuals, I approached many people and asked them about it. But the only answer I received was this: they are Babis. So my own spiritual quest had led me to many cities in Iran. I would enter a city and seek out all the religious leaders there, but I was always disappointed. While in Isfahan, I was invited one night to a garden. The men who were present talked about various subjects. Somehow, the subject of the Bab and his religion was raised, and I said, this person made two great mistakes. I said, therefore, he was unable to accomplish his goals and was destroyed. First, he set himself against the established authorities, and second, he tried to overturn the customs and beliefs of the masses. He should have allied himself with one or the other of these factions in order to gather support for his cause. So one of those present responded politely, says, if this was a mistake, then it was a mistake was made by all the prophets of God, including Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, and all the holy imams. So I was kind of embarrassed after that reply. And I realized that the one who answered me must be a Babi, and that there must be more to the Babi cause than I had previously thought. I decided to become friends with this person, which was not an easy task since all Babis were in grave danger and had to be extremely cautious. This is funny. This is the early days of the faith. I remember my parents in Morocco when they were pioneering in Morocco and they arrived. They couldn't talk. You're afraid. I mean, you had to choose. Who do you mention the faith to? You can't just go ahead and talk. You can't do that. So, and in those times you could risk your life. So he eventually adopted me as his student, though at first he was afraid that I might be insincere in my quest. Fearful of the consequences of revealing his own inner convictions, he scarcely told me anything. Although he did not speak of the cause, he was preparing the ground for a sacred and fruitful conversation. So I gradually won his confidence. So it happened one day that I saw a large crowd gathered in one of the squares of the city. I was attracted by the noise and the commotion and drew closer. There I saw 5 Sayyids, mullahs and merchants, well-dressed and from the respectable classes. Their ears had been nailed to a post, and soldiers were beating them with sticks, demanding that they recant their faith. I was amazed that even in that desperate condition, those believers were calm and patient and thankful. They refused to recant and quoted passages from the Quran to prove the claims of their prophet, the Bab. Now, of course, looking at this, it's very hard to imagine these things happening. I mean, I don't know. Do we need to see film to believe in this, to get the point? I don't know. I don't know. The cruelty and the martyrdom in Iran is hard to comprehend, really. I mean, we read it. I don't know if it goes through our brains. I'm not sure it does. As I observed their steadfastness and submission to the will of God, the fire of search was inflamed within me. And then I got an idea of the grandeur of this faith. So I became, a bit later, more intimate with my friend, and when he was assured of my sincerity, he finally said that he was a Babi, and we began discussing the faith. So, because we were afraid of being discovered, they couldn't meet openly. So the times and places of our meetings kept shifting. It's like very secret. Some nights he would invite me to his house, but always after midnight. When I entered the house, I had to hide myself in the corridor until we were sure that all the members of the household were in bed and sound asleep. Then and only then would my friend come for me and conduct me quietly to the kitchen. There we would study the Bab's writings and chant prayers. At times when it was too dark and we were unable to see the words, the only thing we could do was place a candle on the floor of the oven, then hold up the writings to the light, and with great difficulty study them. When my friend came to my house, it was with the same secrecy. Sometimes it would become even more difficult. We could not have meetings of more than 3 or 4 persons, and then only late at night. Once I rented the upper room of a certain house. My room had a window that opened on the garden, so that the people in the house would not know where I went at night. I used to climb down from the window by a rope tied to the iron bars and return to my room the same way before sunrise to sleep. So you can imagine how difficult, how horrible it was to be able just to live and try to learn or teach the faith, in deepest secrecy. So my father was not a believer. He was a sheikhi and a follower of Haji Muhammad Karim Khan. This guy was, I don't know who he was exactly. Anyway, he was very close to the leader. He was a student of Sayyid Qazim. He assumed the position of leadership among the sheikhs in Iran after the martyrdom after the Sayyid's death, and became a bitter enemy of the Bab. So his father was a follower of the gentleman. So he was firmly against my faith and would follow me to many places to voice his opposition to my beliefs. We exchanged some letters, but they did not help. Eventually, he left Kirman in quest of me and found me in the small town of Nain. And you will know, if we stick with the story of Haydar Ali, he just kept moving across Iran for years and years and years, non-stop. So he ended up in Nain. He hoped that there he would be able to educate and guide me, since most of the people of the town were followers of Karim Khan, this leader who was the enemy of the Bab. My father went to the governor of the town, whom he knew personally, and asked for me to be brought to him. I was summoned to the governor's house, but with the assistance of God, I was able to speak in a manner that pleased everyone. They all encouraged me and spoke words of approval. Since the grace of Haji Muhammad Karim Khan has encircled you and protected you, they said, he has not allowed you to go astray. Every morning, it was their custom to recite verses from the Quran after prayers. It was my honor to recite these verses, and everyone was always pleased to hear those beautiful words. To open the way for our discussion, I began to include verses of the Bab with those from the Quran. No one criticized or even detected that verses other than those from the Quran were being chanted. This gave me an opportunity to present my argument to the people in the room, particularly my father. An uncle of mine, Hájí Muhammad Ali, lived in Nain. He was a good friend of mine and knew of my correspondence with my father. So I asked him if he could be willing to hide me and protect me and take me secretly to Isfahan. He accepted and I prepared to leave. I went to the hall where my father was and the governor and several other people were seated. I sat next to my father and said to him, "Suppose I had been born blind and could not know you by sight. Could I not certainly recognize you by your voice? What is your aim in asking this question?" He responded. "Let me finish the premise. Then you would comprehend the purpose of my question." I replied, "Suppose again that you were to go on an extensive trip and return home only after a long time. I shall still know you by your voice and shall naturally run to you. When I receive kindness, compassion, and love, I shall know for certain that the newcomer is my father." All present agreed. This is true. It is obvious and understandable. Now, here's my question, I continued. When I chanted the verses of the Quran for you, I often included the verse text revealed by the Bab. I'm sure you recognize the verses of the Prophet Muhammad by his words, tone, and style. Then why did no one protest? Surely only because the words revealed by the Bab have the same tone, vigor, and style, and come from the same source. This concluded the discussion. I left the hall quickly and made for my uncle's house. I stayed in his house for a month until all efforts to find me were exhausted. Then I secretly left Nain and traveled to Isfahan. Probably would have arrested him, maybe killed him. My father and others came to Isfahan looking for me, and there they made efforts to have me killed or imprisoned. But the Hujjatul Islam, Sayyid Asadullah, was a very influential man in Isfahan and was related to me through my mother. The followers of Karim Khan were rejected by the prominent ulama in Isfahan, and the two groups were openly hostile to one another. Seeing only that I was opposed to these people, whom they hated, the ulama protected me, my enemies were defeated, and I was victorious. But then, when my father died, I learned that he had disinherited me. Okay, this is basically the opening chapter of how he came in contact with the faith and what he went through even in those early months. In Isfahan, I spent most of my time in the presence of Zain al-Mukharrabin. We used to go to distant and desolate places far from the tumult of the towns and villages just to be together, study the writings, chant prayers, and discuss the cause of God. These moments of joy kept us alive, but we longed to teach and make his name known in any way we could. We tried different methods of approach. See, again, we come back to this method business. And you have to be very inventive in teaching the faith. We went to an Indian who claimed to have some medical knowledge. And Janab Zain opened the discussion by saying, "I feel a painful sensation in my heart. I know of no physician who can help me." "What is the cause?" asked the physician. Janab Zain replied, "A few days ago, I was walking in the street when suddenly I beheld a strange sight. Some people held captive and helpless in the hands of a savage mob were being tortured and mercilessly persecuted. I was so disturbed and alarmed that ever since then I have felt this pain in my heart." Then Janab Zain went on to tell the Indian doctor about the revelation of the Bab, his tragic history, and his writings. This is tricky. This is, you know, the approach to how you get to mention the faith in a situation like this. It reminds me again with when in Morocco when we couldn't teach very much. And my father, I think, one day said to one of his contacts, his friend, somebody he was trying to teach, that he had heard something very good that had happened in the world, and that he should go see a certain person, in a different town, and just go and find out because he wanted to know more about it. So you find ways. Sometimes you can't speak directly, you go indirectly, and somehow if you mean well, the approach always bears fruit. So one day we were outside the city of Isfahan in a very pleasant place where there was a mosque and a stream and a few trees. We have taken provisions to spend the night. We went to the mosque where we planned to stay. A few of the inhabitants were curious, so they entered the mosque and someone asked me where I was from. I had a slight Isfahani accent, but I said that I was from Shiraz. Why are you lying? The man replied, it is obvious that you're from Isfahan. 70,000 angels will curse a liar. So I said, have you seen those angels? Hoping to create an opportunity for teaching the faith. Why shouldn't I have seen them? He replied, they are recorded in the authentic traditions of our faith. I was rather incautious and I said, well, yes, I can tell that you have the spiritual discernment to have seen them. Then they guessed our secret and immediately cried out, these people are Babis, come and get them. And we were forced to leave all our belongings behind and run away. That's what happens. So these problems often occurred. There is one funny story about a certain Sayyid who was a student in a religious school. I used to speak to him and I invited him to my home a few times. He claimed to have accepted the faith. He got to know a few of the believers and some of the writings of the Bab were given to him. Then someone informed me that the Sayyid had said to him, I have gotten to know some Babis. When I meet all of them and find out what their schemes are, I plan to inform the authorities and have them all arrested. That's what happens in Iran and the Middle East. This is in the olden days. It probably continues. So this Sayyid was living at the religious school at the time. So I went to the headmaster of the school and told him that he had a student who was a Babi and was in possession of some of the writings of the Bab. I also made sure that someone told the Sayyid what I had done. So when he heard this, he was overtaken by fear and leaving all his belongings behind, he fled from the town and never returned. A few years later, I was going from Shiraz to Bushir. On the way, I stopped at a mosque in a small town, not knowing that this same Sayyid now lived there. He saw me and recognized me, seeing an opportunity to take his revenge. He approached me and said, do you remember what you did to me in Isfahan? Yes, I replied, you are the same Babi student who was going to be arrested and killed in Isfahan. Now you have come here and have become a leader of Muslims in this mosque. He was so frightened by my reply that the whole time I was in that place, he would not leave my side, fearing that I would denounce him to others. He brought me food and tea until I left. Although I was often persecuted in Isfahan and sometimes suffered great hardships, I was happy. Now, when somebody says that and doesn't give you details, it's just up to you to imagine what he meant by that. When somebody says, I was often persecuted, was it just hated? Was he beaten? And sometimes suffered great hardships. He was happy. So, since we're not getting any footnotes on this and he's not elaborating and under the course phase he's not explaining, we have to assume that this man has been going through this all his life. I was in love with the writings of the Bab, especially the Persian Bayan. Every day I would transcribe a portion of this book. In those days, many were convinced that the advent of him whom God shall make manifest could not be far off. I used to say that if the Bab had not manifested himself, then the writings of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim Rashdi would have been left useless and unfulfilled. Now, similarly, If the dispensation of the Bab were not followed by the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest, then the writings of the Bab would have no purpose. I did not like Azal. Now, Azal, is the half brother of Baha'u'llah, who's the enemy of the faith, the breaker of the covenant, and he caused immense misery to Baha'u'llah. So I did not like Azal. I don't know, he doesn't say why. I used to say, what is the difference between the hidden Azal and the hidden Imams of Islam? Furthermore, I thought that his writings were just nonsense, except when he quoted from the writings of the Bab, but I was confused and uncertain about these thoughts. So at the time, Baha'u'llah had not revealed himself, and I don't know Azal, because Azal, at one point, Azal was named by the Bab to be like his successor, right? He was like a figurehead, but he was appointed. Then Kamal Zein brought me 2 tablets of Baha'u'llah. I recognized a certain mysterious power and magic in every word. I fell in love with these writings. Later, Hájí Mírzá Muhammad Afnan, the uncle of the Bab, came to Isfahan and brought with him a precious gift, a copy of the Kitab-i-Iqan, the Book of Certitude, which had been revealed in answer to his own questions. When I read this volume, I became 1,000 times more attracted to Baha'u'llah, his utterances, and his writings. I would openly say that I regarded the writings of Baha'u'llah as the greatest miracle ever performed, but some people were not happy with my views. Now, historically, I'd like to know when was the Kitab-i-Iqan revealed? Because I guess here the sequencing of time doesn't seem right. Did Baha'u'llah reveal Kitab-i-Iqan before he revealed?
He revealed the Kitab-i-Iqan, it's around January of 1861.
Yeah, but by that time, Baha'u'llah was where?
So
Baghdad, no?
the uncle of the Bab, Hájí Mírzá Muhammad, had been perplexed to hear the promised one of Islam was his own nephew. When he was told that this was the same objection voiced by the uncle of the Prophet of Muhammad, he was shaken and decided to investigate the matter. In 1861, he traveled to Karbala, Iraq, to visit his brother, Hájí Mírzá Haydar Ali, and went to Baghdad to meet Baha'u'llah. There, he posed 4 questions about the signs of the appearance of the promised one in writing to Baha'u'llah. The 200 pages of the Kitab-i-Iqan were written in the course of 2 days and 2 nights on January 15th, 1861.
Okay, so I guess here he's sort of skipping. He's not following time here because the way he's telling he's writing his memoir, and the way it is translated, it sounded like we are still at the time of the Bab, that Baha'u'llah has not really been imprisoned, nor had he been sent to Baghdad, and so on and so forth, because now he's jumping to the fact that he didn't like Azal, and then he gets the writings of Baha'u'llah, and we're jumping to 1861, whereas at the beginning of the story, we were still in the 1850, 1844, 45, 46, so I don't know why he does that. Anyway, one of Azal's supporters told me Baha'u'llah wants to take advantage of the prophecies of the Bab and claim the position of him whom God shall make manifest. Therefore, he has imprisoned Azal. That's a rumor. Sometimes he beats him and forces him to produce books which Baha'u'llah then publishes in his own name. See how people make up all these stories. When he said these things, I was amazed. I had never heard such nonsense. I protested that the Kitab-i-Iqan was a matchless work, while the writings of Azal were neither significant nor well written. He claimed that the Iqan was written by Azal and that those writings which were attributed to him were not really his. This increased my amazement. However, since the conversation was friendly and confidential, I did not argue with him, but kept the matter to myself. I continued to transcribe the bayan, but soon I became too well known in Isfahan and my friends began to avoid me. Finally, I was left alone and homeless. There was a large abandoned religious school where only a poor teacher conducted children's classes. I found lodging in a room in this old school. I had nothing with me but a copy of the Quran, the Bayan, the Kitab-i-Ikan, and the Masnavi. It's the 4-volume work of Rumi. I prepared myself for 4 months of retreat. The caretaker used to prepare food for me, and as long as I lived in that dilapidated place, I met no one and no one knew I was there. Gradually, I began to realize that seclusion is a waste of one's life. I reminded myself that one's actions should be pleasing to God, but this could not be accomplished unless one was of service and guided the people to the right path of God, that is, to new manifestation. Therefore, I decided to leave Isfahan. For more than 6 years, I journeyed from town to town and from village to village across the length and breadth of central Iran. Again, he's not going to tell us how and where he went for 6 years, but you can just imagine, he just never stopped. Although I traveled under the most difficult circumstances, I was in a state of the utmost joy. Everywhere I proclaimed the advent of the Bab and the expected one whom God would make manifest. On many occasions, people attacked me, beat me, imprisoned me, and caused me unbearable suffering. Very often I was beaten more than I had appetite for. On one occasion, when I had been beaten most severely and my body was covered with wounds, one of the members of the Aliyullah sect came to my rescue. These people have peculiar and exaggerated ideas concerning the rank and position of Ali, the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. This man offered me hospitality until my wounds were healed. When I regained enough strength, I resumed my journey. I went to Shiraz and proceeded directly to the Ikhani Mosque, where Mullah Hussein and his friends had once taken lodging. While I was there, I met Haji Sayyid Muhammad Afnan, the uncle of the Bab, and some other believers. I found the friends in Shiraz to be wholeheartedly attracted to Baha'u'llah. There was no mention of Azal. Janab Afnan's countenance was always beaming with joy and sweet smiles. One of the friends, Sayyid Abdul Rahim, who was well versed in the Bayan, had extracted many verses with which he could prove that the one who would be manifested could be none other than Baha'u'llah, and that Azal was only a name without a reality. That same Sayyid related the following story. After the martyrdom of the Bab, when Azal had become famous, I traveled to Tehran just to meet him. But I remembered that when I was in Badasht, I had seen manifest reverence paid to Baha'u'llah by no less than Quddus and Tahireh, and as a matter of fact, by every person in that great conference. When I reached Tehran, I met Baha'u'llah in the bazaar. At this time, his glory was hidden under a myriad veils of light. So this is the Sayyid is telling the story. So once when I reached Tehran, I met Baha'u'llah in the bazaar. At this time, his glory was hidden under a myriad veils of light. He approached me and asked me if I had come to see Azal. I answered affirmatively. I went in his company to his house. Once there, he asked for tea to be served. Azal brought the samovar, served the tea, and remained standing in the presence of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah spoke to me, and rivers of knowledge and wisdom flowed forth from his mouth. After drinking tea, he stood up, turned to Azal, and said, "He has come to see you." Then he went into the inner court of the house. Azal sat down. I bowed low before him to express my respect. Naturally, I expected him to speak to me, but he said nothing at all. This is one of my favorite scenes. This is an amazing scene. It's been just gorgeous. This to me, it's probably the best part of what I have read so far. Now, I don't know that, see, because this is not detailed in terms of the years and all this. I wonder that incident would have happened when exactly in relation to Baha'u'llah's imprisonment in the Siyashal. Do we know? The Bab was martyred in 1850, correct, Violeta? So when was Baha'u'llah imprisoned in Siyashal? And like this story about Azal and Baha'u'llah and after the martyrdom of the Bab could happen in 51, 52, because in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah went to Baghdad when in 50.
Well, hold on, there's like a bunch of questions there.
Oh.
Siyachal, he was imprisoned in the Siyachal for 4 months. Why don't they put a year?
Yeah. Because we know in 53, Baha'u'llah was already in Baghdad, right? And he had declared his mission, is that correct?
Well, he declared it right before he left.
63.
63, sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Wasn't he in the Siyachal from 1852 to 1853? But I'm just guessing.
Yep. 1853.
Okay. So because in 53, he was already in Baghdad, is that correct?
At the end of 53, perhaps.
End of 53, like because he traveled in the winter.
And then 2
Yeah,
years
it was December. Yeah, in December he started.
Okay.
And it was 10 years between the revelation in the Siyachal and the Garden of Irfan. So it's 1850 to 1863.
Okay, so, because he spent 2 years in the mountains, right? In seclusion and all that. But that was between 53 and 54 and 55, right there. So this conversation would have happened around 50, after the martyrdom of the Bab, 51, 52, right? This incident here, when Azal was the nominee and Baha'u'llah was still. So did we decide when was Baha'u'llah imprisoned in Siyashal?
4 months in 1850, between 1850, 4 months in 1852, 1853, something like that.
Okay, so this happened before Siyashal. Okay, all right. So to earn my living, I would transcribe books for people. At times I became a doctor. At other times I wrote amulets and foretold the future. Sometimes I was an exorcist. Wow, all these professions. By the grace of God, I was successful at that. Sorry?
I found something in God Passes By. Baha'u'llah arrived in Baghdad on the 8th of April, 1853. So that winter must have been the early months of 53.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have the span of, so from 1850 to 1853, and then when did we say Siyashal took place, Violeta? In relation to that, we don't know yet.
Before.
So there was a time when Baha'u'llah was basically free. I mean, he did not, people knew that most likely he was the next, the manifestation of God that was promised, but so anyway, these years between 50 and 53 are interesting years to be able to look at carefully. All right. So, by the grace of God, I was successful at whatever I attempted. The money I thus earned, I divided in 2 parts, some to cover the bare necessities of my own life, and the rest to feed the destitute. Some nights, I had nothing but water.
I'm sorry, Kamal. I looked it up. It's August of 1952. He was in Siyachal.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So these incidents happened between 50 and August of 52. All right. Interesting to look at the details of what happened during those years before Siyashal. Thank you. Thank you all for helping. So some nights I had nothing but water. In those days, one often met men called dervishes who spent their time, wealth, and energy trying to discover what they called the elixir, a substance with which they would be able to change this base metal into gold. They had many old manuscripts describing the process, and I was able to increase my income by copying some of these old books for them. They really believed that eventually they would be able to change mountains into masses of gold. So the kinds of things people believe are sometimes astounding. I'm always astounded by the fact that the followers of the already established religions will deny whatever proof we offer them of the truth of the message of God for this day, but will believe in all sorts of miracles performed not only by their own prophets, but by mysterious forces emanating from the graves of some of their followers. Eventually, I made my way to Baghdad. Again, you can see that he's skipping quite a lot here because we're not getting details of what he did during some of those years. But my way to Baghdad, traveling that great distance on foot, I traversed deserts and mountains, living very frugally. Although I endured many physical deprivations, I still remember often and lovingly the joy of those days. Sometimes I long for a moment of those intoxicating times. I used to walk for several days before I would reach a village where I could rest to cure the blisters and regain strength to resume my journey. Some of the innkeepers were very hard. Either they would not allow me to enter or they would demand exorbitant prices. Nevertheless, I continued my long march towards the city of Baghdad. I already knew that Janab Zain was in Baghdad and that most of the friends did business in a marketplace called the Suq al-Haraj. When I reached Baghdad, I immediately made for this market and with the help of friends sought Janab Zain. An uncle of mine whom I had never seen had decided to transfer his residence from Iran to the holy cities of Karbala and Najaf. His name was Mirza Muhammad al-Wakil. I did not know that he had become a believer. Through Janab Zain, we met each other. He took me to his house and showed me much kind hospitality. I later learned that among the more than 80 believers who had been imprisoned and exiled from Baghdad to Mosul were my uncle and Janab Zain. After some years, my uncle returned to Baghdad and Janab Zain, on Baha'u'llah's instructions, made the Holy Land his home. Ismullah al-Munir was in Baghdad when I arrived there. Munir was a great man adorned with all the heavenly virtues. I spent much of my time with this illumined and illustrious soul. A certain friend called Hájí Mírzá Javad also lived in that town. He had committed to memory the text of the entire Qayyum al-Asma, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph written by the Bab. He used to recite it and explain the words of the Bab. He was faithful to Baha'u'llah and would not say anything about Azal. Okay, are you with me? Am I losing you? Yeah?
No, we're all here.
With
Okay.
you.
All right, well, close your eyes and just imagine.
You're
imagine
here,
all
Dad.
our coronavirus compared to what this guy went through is something else. Anyway, I'm glad that he's not giving enough details for my taste. Unfortunately, it's just too much edited. I like to hear more.
Can I just say that you've been spoiled by Juliet and all her details, and now anything you read is like not enough details for you.
Oh God, these people. No, I guess he probably wrote it, but Mr. Faizi must have cut out a lot of stuff. After some time, I returned to Shiraz by way of Bashir and Bushir. In Shiraz, I happened to meet Shuja al-Muluk, one of the army chiefs who had fought against Wahid in Iriz. Though an enemy of the cause, he confessed that Wahid was the most erudite person of his time, particularly with regard to the Quran and its interpretations. He even went on to state that Wahid and his followers had fought as courageously as the martyrs of Karbala. I also met the treasurer of Prince Mehdi Kuli Mirza, one of those who commanded the government forces in the Tabarsi upheavals. He told me that there were three statements which he considered to be monstrous lies. One, that I embraced this religion and then recanted my faith. Whoever says this lies when he claims that I converted and lies when he claims that I recanted. Two, that Mullah Hussein fought with me and wounded me. Anyone whom Mullah Hussein struck in battle died immediately. Three, that I fought with Mullah Hussein face to face. Actually, he was facing away from me and I shot him in the back and killed him. In Tehran, I again met Janab al-Munir since he knew of my convictions and of my love for the ancient beauty. He showed me a tablet called the Surat al-Ashab, which had been revealed in his honor by Baha'u'llah. As I read this tablet, I felt in every verse a fire of enthusiasm and I could not control my feelings. So I turned to Janab Munir and asked him whether Sayyid Muhammad had deceived Azal or Azal had deceived Sayyid Muhammad, or whether the two of them had simply joined together in rebellion against Baha'u'llah. When Janab Munir heard these words, he embraced me and kissed me and said, "The enemies of Baha'u'llah are united in one thing alone, and that is to join forces against him. They deceive and mislead each other in order to oppose him." I was set on fire by reading the Surat al-Ashab. I felt such joy and spiritual exaltation that even now, after 50 years, although I am getting older and all my senses are waning, the mere thought of those memorable moments sets my soul ablaze and ignites the lamp of my heart. Of course, Violeta is going to find us this Surat al-Ashab. Not today, maybe the next time. I don't know. She's going to dig through all her sources. So the Bab proclaimed the glad tidings of the advent of Baha'u'llah, and in the 6 years of his ministry, he prepared the people perfectly, made the way clear, and planted the seeds of love and obedience to the Promised One in the hearts of the Babis. Baha'u'llah served the Babi faith and educated, protected, and nurtured the Babis in such a way that eventually 99 out of 100 came to recognize in him the fulfillment of all the promises of the Bab. Baha'u'llah sowed the seeds, provided them with the water they needed, protected them from the evil deeds of the enemies, attended them tenderly, and encouraged them to grow more vigorous each day. Therefore, when the hour decreed by God arrived and Baha'u'llah revealed his station, the true believers turned their hearts and souls to the ancient beauty and found no veil but light and no hindrance but intense splendor. Najaf Ali was one of those true believers. At the time of his martyrdom, he gave thanks and was heard to say, "We have found Baha and we hasten to offer our lives as a sacrifice to him. He is our ransom." He was so enkindled that he hastened to his death with the utmost joy and exultation. When the cup of martyrdom was brought to him and he saw it overflowing, he exclaimed, "There is a custom in our province. The bride is taken on horseback to the house of her future husband. When the bridegroom sees the bride approaching, he gives the owner of the horse sumptuous gifts, such as costly clothes and gold coins. He then addressed the executioner, saying, I have long stored these gold coins for this day, day of my greatest happiness. Here they are, take them." Then he pulled out a sack of coins from his pocket and with intense joy offered it to his executioner. Another believer, being taken to his death, asked the executioner, "Would you be so kind as to cut my vein first and give me some time before the final blow?" The executioner, hoping that the old man would recant his faith, held his dagger to his victim's neck, making a wound. To his extreme surprise, he found the martyr holding his hands like a cup and filling them with his blood. The believer then cried out, "O people, be my witness. Here I testify to the truth of my faith, my own blood. So I'm going to conclude with this next section, very short section. It was near Nowruz when I made for Adrianople. On the way, I passed through Qazvin, where I went to the house of Mirza Muhammad Ali Qad Khuda, who was one of the notables and dignitaries of the province. I met some of the friends there. My host related to me the following. I was a dervish and the follower of a mystic leader called Mirza Kuchik Shirazi. He knew Tahiri and had extraordinary praise for her knowledge, audacity, faith, and spiritual power. Because of this, I once asked my mystic leader, "What do you think of the Bab's claim?" To which he retorted, "The Bab has written a unique and unsurpassed commentary on the Surah of Kawthar. Should he lay down his pen, no one of the past or present would ever dare to pick it up. But unfortunately, he has not studied under or served any of the mystic leaders. His pen, should he lay down his pen, no one of the past or the present would ever dare to pick it up. But unfortunately, he has not studied under or served any of the mystic leaders." This answer made me sad and forced me to contemplate the words he had spoken. I repeated to myself again and again, "He says that no one can ever dare to pick up his pen, yet he must be schooled and trained by a mystic leader like himself. How strange." As a matter of fact, his answer drew me to the Bab and I embraced his faith. Okay, so unfortunately, there is no, the chronology of the stories is not, we never know exactly where we are in terms of the revelation of martyrdom of the Bab and the revelation of Baha'u'llah. So he is giving us sections. So I just want to stop here and open up for discussion among the friends.